Hello and welcome back to the series Masters of the Chessboard. In this series we're going through the famous book by Richard Reti, Masters of the Chessboard, looking at each of the games in that book one at a time and Reti's analysis of those games. We've just finished looking at the chapter in the book about the Reti opening, and now we're starting to look at a new master, Alexander Alekhine. So Alekhine was actually the world champion at the time of Reti writing his book. Alekhine had won quite a lot of tournaments when he was quite young, 16, 17, 18. But unfortunately his victories were sort of disrupted by the First World War, understandably so. However, following a series of major tournament wins between 1921 and 1927, and his publication of some of his books showing off his greatest games, he and Capablanca eventually agreed to a match for the World Championship. The outcome of this match was 25 draws, 6 wins for Alekhine and 3 wins for Capablanca. Now Alekhine in particular was renowned for his work ethic. He was an exceptionally hard worker. And his play style as well, he has a very, it's very clear he has a very high level of imagination for chess, and he has a very clear determination to attack as well. And his play style and his books explaining his moves are often quite logical, and his moves are all quite logical, quite easy to understand. They're almost like the most natural moves on the board, and it makes his play really quite beautiful. Now here we see Alekhine start with d4, and his opponent, Heinrich Wolf, responds with d5, with knight f3, c5, c4, and now black has a few options. Black could play e6, going into the Tarrasch defense, but the Tarrasch defense was rarely played at this time, and it was sort of thought to be not so good, and it still isn't thought to be quite as good. The semi-Tarrasch is a bit better, where you start with knight f6 before you push c5. But so instead, black took on d4. And Reti comments that this is perhaps preferable to e6 because it leads to symmetrical structures. And in a symmetrical structure, white's advantage of having the first move is likely to be slightly lessened. So it's black's way of trying to equalize. Not the most exciting play, but it's nothing wrong with it. C takes d5, and now knight f6 is played. And we have a symmetrical position. Even the pawn structure is symmetrical, with black's pawn being on d4 and white's on d5. Now here, white takes with the knight. It's worth noting, queen takes d5 is an option, but white's able to get quite far ahead in development, because they can just immediately play knight c3 attacking the queen. Obviously, if you take, you lose your queen. So because of that, knight f6 was played, and we now have a symmetrical position. And black can maintain symmetry here. You see knight takes d4, and if black wanted to maintain symmetry, they would take on d5 themselves. However, this would still give white a small lead in development with e4. Knight to b4, bishop to d3, and white's got a slight advantage here. Sorry, not bishop to d3. Bishop to e3. Bishop to d3 hangs the knight. So bishop to e3. So white's got a slight lead in the development here. However, here Wolf played. Wolf didn't take on d5. Wolf instead played the move a6. And the reason is he wants to almost pass the move back to Alekhine. Because if Alekhine wants to continue with knight to c3, now knight takes d5, e4, knight takes c3 is an option. And Reti comments that this move it's just too lackluster. It's too passive. Moves like this may work against people who allow moves like this to almost interrupt their own development, but they would rarely work against someone like Alekhine, who was able to fight back against moves like this. And that's what he does. Alekhine immediately tries to argue that this move is a waste of time, and he plays e4. And the pawn's undefended. It's a sacrifice of the e-pawn, and black takes it. It's the best move for black to take it. And the reason is Alekhine's going to try and argue that this d-pawn is very strong, and he's going to try and utilize the e-file to his advantage. So he plays queen to a5 check, and the reason he plays queen to a5 is he wants to try and force one of the black pieces to d7 to block this d-file. Now obviously if you play to b5, bishop takes b5 check, because you can't take back, because you'll lose the exchange and a pawn. And you can't really play queen to d7, because there's bishop to b5 coming. And because of that, black has to play knight to d7 or bishop to d7. So black plays bishop to d7. And now we see queen to b3. Knight to c5, attacking the queen, but also defending this e6 square a bit more, hoping to try and push e6 to free up this bishop. So Alekhine plays queen to e3, preventing this e6 pawn break. And because this pawn break's prevented, black naturally tries to fianchetto his bishop. He wants to try and get his king castled as soon as possible. However, Alekhine is also able to immediately try and take advantage of this weakening of the diagonal. He plays knight to f3, attacking the knight, queen to c7 to defend it, but then queen to c3, attacking the rook. Rook to g8 was played. Note that if you play something like f6, it doesn't work because b4, threatening to win a knight due to the pin, and something like knight e6 to try and defend just fails because it takes, and obviously our queen is defended. So something like f6 doesn't quite work due to b4. So rook g8 is forced. We now see bishop to e3, attacking the knight. And the knight's pinned. And again, b4 here still doesn't quite work. Bishop g7 is now an option, which makes things really quite awkward. Obviously, queen c4 would just lose the exchange. If queen c2, then I think knight e6 does work, because this queen is now undefended, so we're forced to take. So b4 still isn't quite working. So Alekhine plays bishop e3 first, attacking the knight this way. We see b6 to defend it. And b4 still isn't working due to the same moves we saw. Actually, Reti gives a bit of analysis to this. He says b4 doesn't work due to the move bishop g7. And now the moves which Reti recommends is trying to block this bishop with either knight to d4, bishop to d4. Knight to d4 is potentially the worst of the two options, because after bishop takes, knight to d4, because after queen to a7, the reason is pawn takes, and we're going to win the piece back. Whereas after bishop to here, bishop takes, knight takes, queen to e5 check will come, and black's okay here. It's not white's still got a definite advantage, but black hasn't lost a piece. So that's why we don't see Alekhine play b4. Instead, we see him play knight b to d2. We see bishop to g7, attacking the queen. bishop to d4, bishop takes, queen takes, and now bishop to b5. Bishop b5 is played because in this position black wants to try and get his king out of the center if he can, or at least have the option to castle, and he wants to get this knight into the game. The knight can't go to d7, can't go to a6, and if it goes to here it'll just be taken. So he plays bishop to b5, intending to accept the exchange and damaging of his structure in order to get his knight to d7. Now the reason he doesn't play bishop f5, which may appear a bit stronger, is because after bishop to e2, knight b to d7, g4 can come, which will potentially win the bishop after bishop c2, rook to c1. And the bishop's just trapped. It has nowhere to go. So because of that, we see bishop to b5. Bishop takes b5 check, a takes b5, castles, and at this point white has now finished his development. And it's pretty clear that the e4 pawn sacrifice by white has achieved a lot in this position. And of course, it's not even a full pawn sacrifice. White has won the pawn back. But we can see with the king on e8 and this open e-file, and the d pawn ready to come to attack to attack on the e-file as well, that black's in a lot of danger here. Now black plays rook a4, attacking the queen. We see b4 blocking. Obviously it's not really attacking because we'd lose the queen. Queen to d8, a3, knight b to d7. You see the rook coming to the e-file. King f8 moving off the e-file. And now we see Alekhine's final combination. And it's all really quite simple. You start with d6, threatening the basic fork, d takes e7 check. Obviously queen would have to take, but then rook takes and you just lose the queen for a rook. If knight to e6, well, knight to e6 was played, blocking the e-file, but Alekhine just takes it. Rook takes c6. And the reason is after f takes e6, knight to g5 comes, threatening this check. But after the queen moves out the way and he checks anyway, king f7, we go back, king f8, queen to d5, and now we see sort of the idea of this whole knight to g5 maneuver. We're threatening mate in 1. Wolf obviously saw the mate in 1, and he played the only move to prevent it, which was rook to g7. But this just loses the exchange. King g8, knight takes g7 check, because of this. King takes g7, d takes e7, attacking the knight. Knight f6, and now queen takes b5, and here black resigns. And the reason is, with a move like a rook e1 coming, knight coming to e5, potentially going to trade off this knight, or even coming to d6 to try and control the square in front, and with Alekhine being a clear 3 pawns ahead, especially if Alekhine may even just choose to trade this pawn for this one and just say he's got 2 clear passed pawns and a kingside majority. So this game is, black has no way to hold this. It's quite a straightforward win, and so in this position black resigned. So that's game number 57 and the first game that we see of Alexander Alekhine. I hope you liked this video. If you did, please do like, comment and subscribe, and I hope to see you next time. Thank you for watching.